If you like to turn in your Bibles, we're going to look at John chapter 10 and verses 1 through 6, where the gospel writer John records how crucial it is for us to hear God's voice using the illustration of sheep and shepherds. So if you look at verse 1, it says, "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. And the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep." See, most people listening to the story at the time of Jesus, they would understand this illustration, though we in the West may not. I don't know how many shepherds you know. When shepherds gathered their sheep, they would put them into this. This is a sheepfold. And a sheepfold was a designated area, usually made with mud or brick, and it only had one entrance, the gate. And it was used for protection against thieves and wolves. And various shepherds would all put their sheep in together into this sheep pile. And since those area would hold the sheep from many shepherds, one doorkeeper, one sentry, would guard the sheep and open the door for those people who were allowed. Verse 3, "The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out." Okay, that part sounds weird, right? Sheep with names? I mean, what do you do? Hey, Jim? Come here, Steve. I mean, what's a good sheep name? Barbara? Bob? I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be sheepish. But this actually corresponds with what we know about Eastern shepherds. They would actually give names to sheep just like we do with horses and cows and dogs. And even today, witnesses have claimed to watch shepherds walk up to a flock of sheep consisting of more than just their own, several hundred, call out a particular one. That sheep will actually break from the flock and walk up to the gate. Verse 4, "When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him, because they know his voice, but they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him, because they do not recognize a stranger's voice." This is also true. If a stranger were to come upon a shepherd, he could actually switch clothes with the shepherd so that the stranger was now wearing the clothes of the shepherd, and he could begin to call the sheep, and the sheep won't listen to him, even though he looks like their shepherd. And their shepherd, who is disguised, can actually start to call them. They'll hear his voice, and they'll follow him instead. And this passage is interesting because it also says that the sheep follow the shepherd. Again, in the West, shepherds do it totally different. Here in the West, we drive our sheep from behind with dogs, and we push them forward. But in the East, a shepherd can actually stand in front of his flock and lead them, and the sheep just follow him. Isn't that crazy? So how will we know we are listening to the voice of the true shepherd, or a thief, or a stranger who has come to destroy us? Because following the wrong voice could be extremely painful, and it could be deadly. Jesus says in Matthew 7:15, "Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves." See, the biblical warning for our day is very clear. We are all a part of a sheepfold, and if we listen, a time will come when we hear a voice that calls us to follow. Verse 6. "So Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them." The Pharisees are the religious leaders. They should have known and been known by their followers, but they had ceased to be shepherds who cared for sheep, and they had become thieves, and all they wanted to do was just acquire more sheep to increase their status. The prophet Ezekiel writes about them. He says, "You eat the curds or the food, you clothe yourself with the wool and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not care for the flock." See, the relationship between sheep and shepherd was quite different in Palestine. In America, sheep are largely kept for killing and for food, but in the East, they are kept mainly for wool. Jesus doesn't use us. He doesn't deplete us. Our true shepherd wants a relationship with us. So how do we get to that point? How can we be like sheep? For a sheep to recognize its master's voice or to learn to come when he calls, that seems like a relationship like that could take months or years to develop. Possibly. But then what else is there to do in the fields all day? How complex is the life of a sheep? For that matter, how complex is the life of a shepherd? As we saw in our last week, in our need to do more and be more, we pack our lives with so much business that inevitably we drown out the Master's voice. Jesus says in Matthew 6, "When you pray, do not be like hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen." Jesus says we cannot hear until we block out all the competitive noise. And you might remember in older translations, if you still have a King Jimmy, what do the older translations say? Go into your what? Closet. Go into your closet, right. And you know what? That's actually a more accurate translation. I want to show you something. I brought a prop. This is a Hebrew prayer shawl, and I have it upside down. It goes like this. And it's called a talit. And talit means little tent, because not everyone can fit in the temple, so you'd have to have your own little tent to carry around with you. And when you put it on, the very first thing they would do, right before they wear it, you might have seen rabbis wear this or Jewish people wear these, before they actually wear it around their shoulders, the first thing they do is they put it over their head. Like this. And this is what they would call their prayer tent. And they would actually, and when it was actually up over their head like this, it was called their prayer closet. And you could actually put it around like that over your face, and you could close the door, and you could, just for a second, be in your prayer closet, and no one would disturb you, and people would see that you were praying. And that would be the same type of shawl that would have been worn by a rabbi or Jesus. And it seems like now that's become more difficult in our modern age. We must actually take the time to make a prayer closet, to make that time alone with God and getting to know our Master's voice when he calls. Fortunately, his words are recorded right there in front of you. They're preserved in the scriptures, and we might never need be deceived. So make the shift in your life to observe tiny moments of solitude. Know his words. Recognize the Master's voice, because there is no greater pursuit in life. Do we speak to God in monologue or dialogue? Do we expect him to reply? Do we wait on God and listen for him to speak? And do we then respond when he does? Some people may hear God speak with their ears, others with their heart. Still others simply feel these divine nudges. God chooses to speak in various ways to different people, and the key for us is to encourage the conversation and to follow his leading. So God speaks to his followers today through the Bible, other people, circumstances, a still small voice, and dreams and visions.